Welcome back to the Small Business Show. I'm your host, Lori Brooks. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. This week, I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with Shawn Khorrami, serial entrepreneur who started or managed more than a dozen businesses up to $100 million in revenue. Today, Shawn and I are going to chat about how you can go about turbocharging your business during tough economic times. Shawn, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Lori, I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm very excited to speak with you.
Certainly. I am super excited to dive into your journey and talk all about where you are with your consulting practice today. But before we do, I'd like to rewind the clock just a bit. I'm going to go back to the days of, say, junior high, high school. Think about when you were a kid and an aunt or an uncle, or even a parent would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up, Shawn? What was your answer to that question back then?
Oh, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. So when I was a little kid, I'm an immigrant. I came from Iran. And when I was in Iran, my dad had a construction company. And in any developing nation, there's a lot of construction because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, roads and bridges and even buildings and things like that. So my dad had this construction company, and from a very early age, probably what would not be accepted today, like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, he was taking me to construction sites. And you got to think, as a little kid, you're getting to climb all over these bulldozers and what have you, right? And messing around with the gears even, right? I have specific recollections of these things. So immediately, I was like, that's what I want to do. One, because my dad was doing it. Two, because as a little kid, it just interested me. And that desire sort of continued on when we moved to the US, even though my father's business never reconstituted that business. Imagine a 45, 50-year-old guy moving to an entirely different part of the world, different language, different economy, different politics, all of that, different construction. But that desire to, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start a construction company. That just was all that was in my head in terms of what I would do. I would become a civil engineer as my dad was.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
Never happened though. Never happened.
There are very few guests on this show who tell me what it was way back when that actually end up there today. So that's not a shocker, but I appreciate you're bringing us back there, and you brought back so many memories for me too.
I was telling you before we started the program, I was saying I'm working on my second book now. And one of the things that I have in there are things like stories from my childhood, a number of them, memories from going back even pre-first grade, first grade. There's one that I've told many times when I give seminars, and so on, that sort of I use today, one, in terms of what I do in business, but also completely shaped me in terms of how I went about doing the things I did and still do today. So it's kind of fun to take a journey back and think about where did this come from in my head? How am I thinking this way? And sometimes it's clear to you when it came about. Sometimes it's a little bit vague. Why do I feel this way about that? And so you kind of point to different events in your life, and going back to your childhood is incredibly important, because there's some important lessons you learned back then that you use today, I guarantee you.
Definitely. You can only connect the dots in reverse. You can only look back and say, that's how and that's why I love doing the show, because I love hearing those moments. I love when people are capable of looking back at that journey, and sometimes they don't even realize it as they're sharing their story that, oh my goodness, this did actually connect as we're going through the story. And this has really become a passion for me, is kind of going through the journey to hear those stories of what it was that inspired someone, or what it was that helped make that connection, or the inspiration for a pivot in their journey even. So what are some of the things that you feel really kind of helped you begin taking your first steps into entrepreneurship? Now, we know it wasn't construction, we know you're in consulting, but what were the first thought process is for you? We know you wanted to do construction, but what was it for you that really sparked the journey?
So, by the way, when we get to what I do now, for example, you'll see it's a very different thing. You can call it consulting, but it's very different. And I'll describe it when we get there. But there going back then, I became an entrepreneur quite by accident. It was again because of my dad. When we moved here, my dad was able to get his hands on a couple of very small income properties, right? Back then, getting professional management for that was really not, it was not as developed in that way as it is today. And also my dad was not the type. He just was in this thing that, well, I can manage that myself. They were disasters. He was terrible at it. His approach to it just didn't work. And so back then, personal computers were coming into homes, right? And what I did was I sort of constructed this really basic database program along with a system to manage these small buildings, only to help my dad. I was like, we gotta figure something out here. So as a 15, 16-year-old, that's what I did. And so what happened was, it worked so well for him. Then he came to me and said, I have some friends that are in the same boat. Can you help them? Yes, I can. And so began my first real company, quite by accident, without me even really knowing. And I actually named that company because he actually did try to create a construction company out here. And so I took the name of his construction company and I put the word management next to it, and that became my management company. And so that was it. But one other thing back then that very much I was aware of it as it was happening, and I was even more aware of it as I became an adult, was that I was a deathly shy person, and I found it to be a huge deficit. Deathly shy. And I'll tell you how shy I was from the time I was in kindergarten until I graduated college. I never raised my hand, never to answer a question, never to ask one. And so that's fallen off by, obviously, but much to the dismay of everyone who knows me. So, but one thing that happened was when I had my daughters, I would say this to their teachers: please get them to speak and participate in class and be kind, because I don't want them to get discouraged from their participation. I don't want them to do something thinking they're participating and then get a very negative response back. It was the one thing that I said to the teachers of my children. The one thing, not two things, one thing I said everything else I'm okay with. That one thing. So this is how much I found it to be a deficit. Years later, another person sort of told me something, and I adopted that as one of the top things that like I say to people, as like a little saying, a little blurb. And that's: the biggest failure in life is the failure to right? The biggest failure in life is the failure to participate, because if you don't, you just will never know. It just won't happen. And so I told the person back then, I said, I'm stealing this from you because it's a big issue with me, but it literally changed my life. That forcing myself to do that is what changed my life. A number of other things changed my life too, as it turns out, for some of those stories. But anyway, but yeah, that was a big deal to me, and that's how I actually started my first company. I got rid of that company because I firmly, for whatever reason, believed in formal education. And by the way, over the years, I freely admit that formal education is not required to be a success in life or in business. But for me, it was incredibly important. It continues to be important because I need a kind of theoretical overview in terms of how something works. I told you before we started, I'm an assembly line person. You use a better word, systems person. But I have to understand how something works. I understand everything has exceptions to it in this way and that way, but once I get that and I have a full view of it, I can operate within that. I need that. Other people may not. Otherwise, I get confused with how it works. And I also love that cramming of information into your brain. And maybe I'm also a little lazy. I wanted to stay in school for a long time. But when I went to school, I got rid of my business. I went and started college. I got degrees in mathematics, computer programming, economics, law. I have formal education, which means not a degree, but formal significant coursework in marketing, sales, and accounting. And if you put all those things kind of together, it's kind of the backbone of what I felt I needed in order to build a solid business, right? And so that's what happened between the time I was like 5 years old. Now we've covered that until I was about 22, because I told you I stayed in school a little long. In fact, I petitioned. They wanted to hand me degrees and get me out of UCLA. I petitioned multiple times for extra units, so I could complete this and that. And so they reluctantly let me do that, and I happily I happily stayed in school way too long.
I love that. So first of all, I appreciate how you really simplified how some businesses begin. Because I think some people overcomplicate the thought process, and it creates this sense of overwhelming anxiety as to, okay, I've got to sit down with the SBA and I need to get a website up and I need to come up with a domain name for the business and so forth. When in actuality, oftentimes businesses begin by default. They begin by default when you're assisting someone who needs the help. You found a market that had a need, you were able to serve the need. And that, now, whether or not you maintain the business, that was your first real taste of entrepreneurship for yourself. So I appreciate you kind of breaking down and simplifying how simply a journey can begin. So
a lot of people say that. A lot of people say, oh, what this business I started because X. You know, I'm talking to someone later today who I want to. We're talking about a joint venture, and she started her business because of a need she had. She was like, she found herself in a situation, and then she said, oh wait, there's nothing for people like me in this situation, and there's millions and millions of people that experience this thing. I won't tell you what it is. It's not anything earth-shattering, but just so a lot of times it comes by accident, because you're absolutely right. People get too involved in the processes of starting a business. And when it happens by accident, usually what happens is you say there's a need, which is the way you should begin a business is, oh, wait a minute, let me look at where there's a need, where I can bring value to someone, where I can help someone with a problem, right? Solve a problem. It doesn't need to be anything like a big problem. You don't need to cure cancer. You need to solve a problem for them. And it may be something very simple, an appliance. Virtually every appliance in your kitchen was invented because someone was trying to solve a problem in the kitchen. And so same thing, you need to be, you have to search out needs, and then and also match that kind of with your skill set and your interests. If you can do that, you have the beginnings of a potentially successful business. You can work on process after that.
Definitely. No, you definitely can work on processes after that. It's great to start on processes immediately once you realize you're going to be moving forward with the practice, but it's not the bulk of launching the business. 100%, it's not. And I also really wanted to kind of touch on something that I know my audience is going to be like, here she goes again. But you said something that I actually, it woke me up to a thought process myself. Now, one of my favorite phrases that the audience is tired of hearing is that there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. But what you were mentioning about the idea of lack of participation being a failure, I can't help but somewhat agree with that one. Truly agree with
Well,
that.
I did preface it by saying it is the biggest failure, and I think it may be the only failure, is that.
Yeah.
I agree with you. By the way, a lot of times people take that the wrong way too, in terms of failure being a place for learning or feedback or what have you. No one's sitting there saying, I want to have something not go as well as I planned, or
Right.
something badly, right? What you're saying is, hang on, it's not the end of the world. You're going to
Yes.
be able to do it better because of this experience. That's what you have to draw from it. And that, by the way, that ends up not in situations like failure either. Think like when you see, oh, this business didn't go so well for me, right? By the way, I always say I'm a serial entrepreneur, and anyone who started more than one business, if they tell you that they haven't failed, they're lying to you. I'll just tell you that. And so it happens all the time. It happens, and with the most successful of people and the richest of people, financially richest of people. But I mean, think about this. COVID happened. I always use that as I mean, more recently, obviously, but use that as a case study of an unprecedented, unexpected, huge disruption. We haven't had that. But what's important is, in that situation, your business did not need to be failing for you to have that feeling of being overwhelmed and feeling like, oh God, what's going to happen? That anxiety, right? If you own a restaurant, oh God, and I was one of them. I was sitting there going, whoo, I'd be taking cover, right? That's not the right approach, right? The people that actually did something and made it through, from the worst affected businesses, and by the way, there were plenty of businesses that COVID was just the right medicine for them, right? The Amazons of the world, right?
Yeah.
But from the worst affected businesses, the people that actually did something were those people that said, okay, where's the opportunity?
Right.
Where's the opportunity? Right? You could just sit there and say, here comes big failure. Here comes a tidal wave that's going to wash me out. Right? Or you could say, where is it that I can take advantage? How can I move and start moving things forward and succeed? And what happened to some of those restaurant businesses? They actually, there's a restaurant down the street from me, by the way. They still have not opened up their dining room. They discovered that it's much more profitable. They're still paying rent in this giant dining room. They don't even have anyone in it. They only do takeout.
Wow.
And what they did was they beefed up their online ordering system. It's fantastic, right? And the way they deal with takeout and deliveries, and they decided, oh geez, forget this whole dining in thing, right? It was not as profitable for us as this other thing. That's not for everybody. I'm just giving an example, and for everyone it's different. But again, they said, okay, how are we going to survive? And what they ended up doing was discover a way that they can survive that was even better than before COVID happened. So there are lessons to be learned and ways to look at something, even though you're looking at devastation in the face, and sort of not only learn from it, but improve things and then actually be better because of it.
Definitely, those moments often create that pivot in a journey. They're often the inspiration for a pivot and a change that becomes something much brighter than what you were initially thinking in the first place. So no, I agree with you 100%, and I thank you so much for bringing those bits up there. So please share with us about your practice today. So I keep saying consulting, but we're going to correct me now.
No, it's not correcting. I don't correct. Mostly because I don't know what correct is. So just don't. But what we do at my company, ePlaybooks, what we do is help small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs, through consultation, education, and investment. it's a different kind of a thing, because most of our business relationships, we consider them joint ventures, and they're at different levels of being a joint venture. It could be anything from us doing a piece of a business to actually being partners inside the business, to actually having a roadmap to doing a full sale of the business. And so it's a more robust relationship than what people think of when they think of consulting. But at the end of the day, yeah, you're basically sitting there, you're building a business unit, or you're helping build the entire business. Sometimes from relatively the ground up, sometimes it's been in existence for a long time. So for example, one of the, I consider this kind of an older business model is having a consumer good and getting it out to consumers through a distributor network, right? Nike, they make shoes. The way you would go 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, probably buy Nikes would be go to Foot Locker or some other retailer and get it. You don't go to Nike and get it because Nike distributes to those entities. Those entities are responsible for getting it out to the consumer. Today, Nike doesn't do that. It does have that distributor network, but it also created a direct-to-consumer relationship, and through various means. And so what one of the things that we do is we help companies like that, where they've been in existence for a long time. They have a successful consumer product, not necessarily a giant company like Nike, but more medium-sized company, right? They're getting their stuff out to consumers that way, and we help them sort of modernize their business by creating the direct-to-consumer relationship, and that begins with doing various sales channels, getting their website together, because a lot of times they won't even have the ability, whatever website they have can't serve consumers. It serves their clientele, right? And so putting all of those things together, including how the teams work together. For example, right, if you have a wholesale business, you have salespeople inside the business, and they're not going to take necessarily too kindly to you retailing, because in their minds, you're taking business away from their customers, who are the distributors that they're dealing with, right? So, I mean, it's just putting together those business units and all of that is stuff that we actually get involved in, and we do it in terms of a joint venture where we actually invest in the venture.
I love that. That is a very unique way of going about and as you said, it's not technically consulting. Yes, there is a consulting piece to what you're doing, but it's not just consulting. It's really a holistic approach to making sure that the pivot is managed properly and has the opportunity to grow from there. So that's very interesting. I love that idea. So I'm curious as to how you got to that point in your journey. What was it that brought you to this point of going a little bit beyond that consulting piece?
Yeah, so what happened was actually it was the other way for me. So what happened was it would always be like I would start a business, I would grow it from there. At some point I may sell it, right? Because I actually like that feel of a small to medium-sized business. I think that all the risk you're taking is really the majority of the risk is there, because once a company gets to a certain point, you have so many stakeholders and so many people propping it to make sure it succeeds. It just changes the dynamic. And in my mind, takes away a lot of the risk. The other thing is that decision-making becomes very clunky because of all those stakeholders. So doesn't really fit my personality. But so what I would do is I would be, and we talked about processes and being systems oriented, right? So I would look at different processes and I would say, oh, geez, we could do this better. And I would try to improve the various processes out there, right, that my own business was having. But that becomes its own business, right? Because I guarantee you, once you start improving some process that your business is using, other people in your industry are having the same issue, right? So you can actually take that and market it in other, to other businesses within your industry. So I would be running multiple businesses at one time, all the time, right? And so, and I also told you, there's no way you don't have failure in that, because if you're going to start multiple businesses, not every one of them is going to be a home run. It's just not going to happen. So what would happen is, over time, family and then friends of family and then friends of friends started coming to me, either because they were having some crisis and they didn't know how to handle it, or because, well, it would be a crisis a lot of times because it would be a crisis the other way too, by the way. You can have a crisis when you're growing. You can have all these orders coming in that you have no infrastructure to fill, for example.
Right.
Right. And so that became what I sort of looked at as this mentoring thing, where I had this whole side thing going that was starting to take a lot of my time, where I'm talking to these people that just know me generally, or maybe they're friends or whatever, and they're just coming to me. So much so that I ended up putting up a personal website, and I said, with a bunch of information that I would send people to that. I would say, and then come back to me and let's sit and talk. From that grew more ventures, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm having more business ventures out of it. So what I ended up doing, I told my wife, I said, I really like doing this thing that I'm doing there. That's this sideshow. So I made that into a business. But in order to do that, as you're dealing with more and more people that are farther apart, right? Eventually you're dealing with strangers, right? And so you have to have different products. So different ways we could engage together, because they may not know how they could engage me. They just have a problem, right? But my job, I felt, was sort of have these things that are problems I see overall, identifying different problems that I see with small and medium-sized businesses as they're coming to me, and then starting to package those as different ways, different products, but at the same time, different ways we could engage with each other, right? So what I noticed was there were really three big areas that SMBs were seeing challenges. One was in sales channels. They were underutilizing and overutilizing sales channels, right? They were on the wrong sales channels for their business at the time, or maybe permanently. That's overutilizing in my head. Underutilizing in that they were not enough on the right ones. They were not putting enough, they were either not on them completely, or they were not putting enough resources or paying enough attention to them. Secondly, small and medium-sized businesses tend to be overly focused, in my opinion, on new customer acquisition. And it's a natural progression, right? Because if you have a small and medium-sized, you got to grow the customer base, right? And so that's the thought. I got to keep getting new customers, right? New customer acquisition. But they forget growing the customer base. They forget the base part. And the base part is very important, because that's the customer that you got to keep those customers. You can't just engage with them one time and then say, oh, thank you very much, bye-bye. Big giant companies know that very well. They spend a lot of energy keeping you as their customer and continuing to sell to you, upsell to you, and treat you very well, frankly, and keep a relationship with you. Small and medium-sized businesses do not do nearly enough of that. And so that was the second challenge. And the third challenge was in the area of logistics, and I throw supply chains in there, particularly since they've become front page news because of COVID. And so that is also an area that there's a lot of challenges. So what we did was we sort of put together different ways we could engage with businesses on all of those three categories of things. That way it's like I can identify, you talk to me, I can identify what the problem is, or I already know what the problem is. Most probably I will know what the problem is before I talk to you. Because if I look at any part of your business, immediately I can say, oh, okay, there's a little bit of an issue there. There's a little challenge there. We can fix this. And then sort of putting together a way we could actually in a defined way work together. And then from there, hopefully expand the relationship. If not, we can just work together that way. in that limited way. But my hope is that we can expand the relationship as we're expanding the business, and do a lot better that way.
I love that. I love that you have taken it from being just a consulting practice to really a holistic view of the entire business and relationship. So it's not just the sale or the assistance of the business, it's really integrating your practice into the practices that you're working with. That's kind of, it's a really unique take on the way that you're approaching business overall. So I appreciate that.
It's been interesting. I like it that way. I think it's one way you can bring value. It's not for everybody, but it works well for me.
Definitely, definitely. So the show is really designed to assist small business owners in coming up with ideas for a business and an industry that they may not have been thinking of. So we would love to know, if you had the opportunity to change anything at all in your practice, what do you feel like that would be for you, whether it be system-wise or not? Do you feel like that change might be for yours?
I'll say it a little bit differently, because so I sort of talked about those three areas. I'll say a fourth thing that I years ago did not pay as much attention to, and I noticed people doing today, that I now pay a lot of attention to, but I also notice people doing today. It's your capital source. Where and how and who your capital source is incredibly important. And the reason I say that is that, one, I completely realize it's incredibly important. And look, I've been in that seat and I've done this. It's incredibly important to have capital to be able to run your business. Mm-hmm. And it's incredibly liberating to have investors or lenders or whatever it is sort of take away some of the burdens that come with having to start your business from the ground up, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so, but that tendency to say, oh yeah, I really like, if someone could come, I could get an investor in this and that, and it would really help me boost my business. And yes, it could, but it could also destroy your business. Mm-hmm. It could also destroy how you want to live your life with you, like in terms of your business, right? Mm-hmm. How you want your business life to be, mm-hmm. your image of what that is. Because then you're introducing something into your business that's kind of has its own pressures. And if you pick the wrong capital source, it could really, really have negative effects. And so, yeah, so that's something that I always say. And by the way, the way I do business now, I kind of look at it as an incubator, because that first contract that I come up with, that first venture that I come up with any business, to me, I'm just watching the different businesses. So I have a limited number that I work with, but I'm watching, and then I'm seeing how I can develop that and then create a different venture out of it. And so one of the things that I require inside of that initial engagement mm-hmm. is basically to bootstrap that business, right? Rather than just, I'm not looking for someone that, I said to you, we help SMBs through consultation, education, and investment, right? That initial investment, I never do it on the first day, because I think that the business has to get some traction, mm-hmm. kind of being bootstrapped, before we really engage with it in that way. And it's because of what I've learned having to deal with capital and really getting the wrong capital. By the way, that's nothing against anyone who's putting out capital out there. I'm talking about the matching of capital to the business. Right. And I'm only talking about not from the capital's point of view, even though I play some of that right now. I'm looking at it from the business's point of view. What you see the capital like, and then how it affects your business, how it affects mm-hmm. your life. That's sort of what I'm talking about. That match has to be the right match, or it can be very destructive.
Definitely. No, I agree 100%. And in speaking about that match and making sure that the funding sources are copacetic to what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what would you suggest in terms of the times right now, the economy the way it is, for those who are looking to go ahead and start turbocharging their business and looking for that correct match? What would you suggest for small business owners?
Well, right now, the current economic climate is kind of tough for raising altogether. I think that what you need to be doing is rather than just kind of what my experience with a lot of times what I see people doing, and again, it may be because I haven't done it exactly that way. I've always actually started a business before doing anything else. But sometimes what I feel like people are doing is they're thinking of the job they'd like to be having, and then they're putting together some stuff on paper and then running around to capital sources and saying, pay me for the job I want to be having. And it feels that way. And again, I don't mean it as putting down anything. I'm sort of like looking at it that way of approaching it. One, you're getting incredibly expensive money, whether it's investment, loan, or whatever it is. I guarantee you it's the most expensive money you're going to get, because that person that's investing in you is investing on something on paper. They don't know how much traction it's going to have. They think it's going to have traction. They hope it's going to have traction. And so what the price of their money to you is incredibly expensive. Number two is right now with interest rates as they're going up, and they're going to continue to go up, that money becomes even more expensive. It becomes more expensive to the person that's handing it to you. And so their expectation of what they need to return in order to be able to make it make sense to them changes. So it's incredibly important to sort of like try to start something, have some use cases, have some traction, so that at least you take away some of those insecurities that your funding source is going to have in order to be able to feel comfortable handing you money, and at the same time you not having to suffer for it because they rightfully or wrongfully they have expectations of what the risk is. So at the very outset, that practice of putting something on paper and running around and saying, hand me money for that, I would discourage it. But I generally, in this economic climate, I particularly discourage it. But I discourage it altogether. But then again, you see people doing that and having huge success out of it. So I don't by any means pretend that I'm an authority on it. It's just my opinion.
Love it. So none of the napkin notes are going to help people right now in today's economy is what it boils down to.
I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this, Lord. I think that the way I say it to people all the times is this: look, you can go play the lottery and you can become a millionaire, right? If you run a business, consider it the same way. There are things that you can do. Things can work. You'll find a story about someone doing something like that and it worked, right? That doesn't mean that you're doing anything more than buying a lottery ticket. And that doesn't mean that you have any better chance at it. So when you're looking at starting a business and you want to be serious about it, do everything that's within your power, at least the best you can. Okay, because you don't want to just sit there and say, oh, this person went and did this, therefore I can't. I see this happen like with apparel businesses a lot. I can't tell you, I have more relatives that started apparel businesses than I have relatives. And so I think that and yes, there's a lot of people who do it and have a lot of success at it. It's a great business. That doesn't mean that you just throw up some stuff on a website and people are just going to buy it, right? There's a lot of work involved, and it's gotten a lot more challenging. So just because someone did it 10 years ago or 15 years ago, or someone started a business on Instagram, for example, that's the perfect example. I use that a lot. Someone started a business on Instagram 10 years ago. they got in at the right time, right? Because marketing and doing business on Instagram was new. The competition was less. Instagram wasn't monetizing as many things as it does today for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
It's a lot different today. So don't think just because you have a friend or a relative that did it 10 years ago on Instagram that you'll be able to do the same thing on Instagram and suddenly, oh, here it is. So those are the things that kind of, when you look at what you do today, whether it's this economy or some other economy, you can't automatically say, oh, this is just going to work. And so, yeah, you see it with small and large companies, and you see it with small and large investments.
The digital landscape changes far too rapidly to bank on any specific platform years out. It really does. So I agree with you in terms of cautioning on which platform you may attempt to start a business, because when you start a business on an alternate platform, remember that business is technically owned by that alternate platform in the first place. So but that's a different conversation for us.
Yes, it is.
Oh goodness,
that definitely is.
If you had the ability to say go back 10, 15 years and tell yourself just one thing, what do you think that one thing would be at this point?
I told you about the capital thing. That's one thing I would tell. But then here's one thing I would do is I always tell people, and I use the PG version of this, I have more guts than brains. And so that tends to be an advantage a lot of times. Everything is a gift and a curse. That tends to be an advantage a lot of the times, because any crisis that comes about, anything that happens, I'm immediately trying to solve it, and I tend to remain very calm while doing it. At the same time, I don't know when to let go. I don't know when to say that's just not going to work. But there's no line. There's no line. There's no line where you say, oh, geez, because someone has rescued something out of some crisis worse than what you're facing. And so you tend to say, then I can do it too.
Yes.
And that makes you lose perspective of when to say, don't keep chasing this thing down the rabbit hole, because that's what you're going down. You're going down a rabbit hole. And so I think you have to learn when to let go. And since there's no line, and I totally agree, there's no line, it's a tough place to be, particularly for me. So but that's one thing I would tell myself 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
I love that. And that's a tough place for all of us. I don't think you're the only one with that problem.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. You know,
there is definitely have some relatives that know when to let go, because they let go of those businesses faster than I can even think. Anyway, I wouldn't suggest that either, right? Sometimes I sit there and go, wait a minute, you just started this thing 3 months ago. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it wasn't going well. 3 months?
3
Really?
months, right.
You decided that was it, right? So like, that's the thing. That's why I say you can't draw that line, you know?
Right. But at the same time, the funny thing is when you look at that, it's also fail fast, because there's certain things that you can tell in 3 months' time that, yeah, that's not going to work out the way I thought it was going to. Yeah. So failing fast is not necessarily a negative thing. However, there are definitely moments that, there's no line. There is no line. And that is the hard part of the journey.
It's a tough decision to make.
There you go. It is when do we call it that time?
Yeah.
But no, it's one of those moments, Shawn. When do we call it time? So Shawn, it's been an outstanding time chatting with you. I thank you so much for joining me today. Please share the best way for our viewers to find you.
Well, the best way is to just go to connectwithshawn.com. Shawn is SHAWN. So that's the easiest way. You can go to eplaybooks.com. And by the way, for any of your audience that contact me, if they mention you, I have I think I mentioned it. My first, which ended up on the Amazon bestseller list. I don't know how, but I will give them a free copy of that.
Oh, that is very sweet of you. And I look forward to the viewers giving reviews and letting us know how they enjoy the book. So definitely, Shawn, we will be sure to put links to both of the sites on the show notes page. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.